Glad you're here. I hope you enjoy the story. Hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe to support the channel. It only takes a moment, but it really helps. The small coastal community was a poorly manufactured tin can, sealed against a vast, indifferent emptiness. It huddled on the far western edge of the territory, facing the brutal indifference of the frozen sea. Polar night had fallen hard weeks ago, but this felt different. This was a prelude to something tectonic. The air, already a punishing 20 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, was absolutely still. The watch lights on the rusty pier, designed to ward off the encroaching dark, merely flickered through the thin, pervasive screen of snow dust, giving the landscape the look of a faded, poorly maintained photograph. The main communal generators down at the power station hummed a deep, suffering bass note, like a large, trapped animal resigned to its fate. Travis Holt arrived 2 days earlier, flown in on a sputtering cargo plane just before the storm warning escalated from advisory to imminent threat. He was a specialist, hired by the territorial police for what they quaintly called wildlife conflict mitigation, a term that usually meant tranquilizing a confused moose or tracking a nuisance bear. This assignment, however, tasted like diesel and impending disaster. He was here to patrol the outlying storage yards, specifically those holding high-grade fuel and frozen perishables. He wore heavy insulated Arctic gear, a thick carapace of synthetic fiber and down, but the cold leached the heat directly from his bones. It was a dry, clean cold that was almost sterile, yet Travis felt coated in the rank, earthy smell of the place: old sea salt, stale fish, and engine oil. On his first circuit, driving a beat-up, wide-tracked utility vehicle that complained with every rotation, he realized the profound error in the town's assessment. The silence was unnatural. In the wilderness, even in the deepest freeze, sound existed. The wind whining across the tundra, the faint creak of shifting ice, the scratch of small rodents under the snow. Here there was nothing. It was a dry, dead vacuum that pressed down on the vehicle, on his chest, demanding attention. It felt heavy, a physical oppression. He left the vehicle idling near the school perimeter, the primary shelter designated for the town if the storm hit full force. The building was blocky, made of cinder block and aluminum siding, unremarkable save for the tall, chain-link fence topped with razor wire surrounding the athletic field. It was in the lee of the fence, where the snowdrift was relatively light, that he found the corridor of tracks. Travis was expert at reading tracks. He read the shifting of weight, the muscle tension, and the mood of the animal in the snow. These tracks defied easy categorization. They were massive, certainly far larger than any wolf or black bear, with dense, heavy pads that displaced the snow deep into the frozen dirt beneath. The most disturbing aspect was the gait. The prints showed an uneven pattern, a hesitant progression that confirmed the creature was moving upright, balancing awkwardly on two incredibly powerful hind legs. Then, abruptly, the pattern shifted, a cluster of 4 impressions, deep and desperate, where the entity had collapsed, relying on all fours for stability, only to stand again a few yards later. It was a creature struggling with its own locomotion. He crouched, shining his heavy-duty halogen flashlight across the disturbed snow. The tracks continued along the length of the fence, not attempting to climb it, but pacing it, measuring the distance, intellectually assessing the barrier. Then he found the hare. Clinging to the razor wire,
Where the fence dipped slightly near the maintenance shed were small tufts of thick, oily fur. It was dark, almost black, and felt unnervingly coarse between his gloved fingers, slick with some residue. It reminded him vaguely of the fur found on certain deep-sea creatures, impervious to cold and water. It carried a faint, acrid odor beneath the general marine smell of the town, something metallic and sickly sweet. The marks on the aluminum siding of the shed were worse than the tracks. Deep, four-fingered indentations were pressed into the metal near the ground. Not scrapes, but actual compressions, denting the aluminum sheeting with frightening ease. The strength required to perform that kind of damage with a casual, passing touch was enormous, far exceeding anything a known predator in the region possessed. His radio crackled to life, pulling him abruptly back to the present. The dispatcher, a woman named Tess Morgan, sounded strained, her voice high and tight. "Travis, status check. We've lost contact with the fishing cabin on the spit." Repeated calls unanswered. "Ice conditions are deteriorating." "Copy that, Tess." "Anything on the weather front?" Travis asked, keeping his own voice level despite the rising alarm inside him. "The Eye is sitting right over the bay, Holt. It's stalled, not moving in, not letting us evacuate by air. It is just hanging there. We are locked in." The feeling of enclosure intensified. They were not just sealed against the elements. They were sealed in with whatever had paced the razor wire and left its massive hybrid tracks in the snow. The town, brittle under a crust of ice and locked in perpetual twilight, was officially a closed world. Travis stood up slowly. The cold suddenly felt predatory, focused. He knew, with the cold, certain dread of a professional who recognizes when the parameters of his job have fundamentally changed, that this was no longer about animal mitigation. This was about containment. He spent the next hour documenting the tracks and the damage, meticulously measuring the stride length and pad size. The dry, dead silence continued, pressing harder now, a suffocating blanket waiting for the storm to provide cover. He logged the findings, noting the unusual combination of massive power and strategic pacing. Whatever this was, it was evaluating its target with unnatural calm. The cold was an accomplice. He drove the utility vehicle back toward the main road, the low, suffering hum of the town's generators now sounding less like a trapped animal and more like a heartbeat, beating slow and hard against a rising tide of unknowable terror. He saw a final faint impression near the road's edge, the clear, striated mark of a huge paw transitioning into the elongated impression of a bare, five-toed foot, impossibly long and detailed, before vanishing into the disturbed snow. The full weight of the polar night bore down on the town, making midnight feel like a permanent, oppressive twilight. At 2:30 in the morning, the heavy silence that Travis had noted was brutally shattered by the hysterical, static-choked voice of a patrol officer over the radio. A snowplow driver clearing the roads in the northern residential sector had failed to check in after his scheduled pass. Travis arrived at the scene 10 minutes later, accompanied by Nina Parker, the town's most experienced paramedic, who was now doubling as forensic support. The plow was parked awkwardly at the edge of a cul-de-sac, its powerful yellow beacon still spinning uselessly into the swirling mist of snow. The engine was running, a mournful cyclical drone that did nothing to alleviate the profound wrongness of the scene. The driver's side door was a mess. It was not just open. It had been wrenched outward against the heavy hinges, bowed slightly where the metal had yielded to phenomenal strength. The interior of the cab was slick with blood. Not the bright arterial spray of a simple injury, but thick, viscous liquid that was almost black in the low light, already starting to crust and freeze along the plastic dash. The smell was powerfully metallic, like a penny held too long in the mouth, mixed with the strange, salty odor Travis had detected at the school fence. Nina, her face pale beneath the reflected yellow emergency light, leaned into the cab. She was sharp, professional, refusing to let the horror take hold. This is too much. He did not survive the attack, Travis. Not with this level of blood loss. Travis focused on the point of attack. The door handle. It was coated in the dark, oxidizing blood. There were two distinct sets of marks impressed in the grime and dried condensation on the steel surface. One set was clearly human, deeply embedded fingerprints, the skin mashed against the handle, suggesting a frantic, panicked grip as the driver struggled to keep the door shut. Interspersed with these were long, curved gouges, 4 parallel lines raking viciously through the metal paintwork, marks left by substantial claws digging in for purchase. The juxtaposition of human terror and primal savagery was sickening. He fought it, Travis muttered, scanning the ground. Fought it from the inside, tried to lock himself in. They moved away from the truck. Nina pointed toward the adjacent property, a small, insulated bungalow whose owner was asleep, oblivious to the catastrophe 10 yards from his bedroom window. "I found this," she said, her voice tight. She held up a piece of dark, damp wool, the torn collar of a heavy winter coat, the edges shredded as if by coarse, powerful teeth, or a rough tear against something sharp. Following the trace of debris, they found a clear sign of dragging, a wide, smeared track leading away from the plow toward the bungalow's back porch. The wooden railings of the porch, stout 2x4s designed to withstand heavy snow loads, were snapped outward, bent at an impossible angle, testament to a powerful, heavy thing being hauled over them. The snow around the porch was the key. Here, the struggle had momentarily paused, leaving a disturbing tableau of footprints. There was the wide, smeared track of the driver's body being pulled, and around it, a mix of impressions. There were the same massive, 4-toed paw prints Travis had seen at the school, deep enough to confirm a weight exceeding 400 pounds. But closer to the house, where the creature had braced itself for the haul over the railing, were the clearly defined, strangely detailed impressions of bare, elongated, human-like feet. They had disproportionately long toes and a pronounced arch, a terrifying synthesis of human structure and bestial power. The horror had a palpable aroma, salty and cloying like heavily brined fish left to rot in stagnant water, undercut with the sharp metallic tang of iron, blood oxidizing fast in the deep cold. Travis pulled out his measuring tape and recording equipment, the professional routine acting as a shield against the visceral fear. He analyzed the depth of the paw prints, calculating the load distribution. The creature, or creatures, was moving purposefully. The direction of travel, tracked in the fresh, light snow beyond the residential zone, was unequivocally toward the industrial mound near the port, the location of the main containers holding frozen fish stores and bulk supplies. "They are not just scavenging," Travis stated, zipping up his parka. "They are gathering. This is not random predation, Nina. They know where the food is kept. They are systematic." A patrol truck, equipped with a powerful floodlight, joined them near the industrial zone. Visibility was deteriorating rapidly. The storm, still hanging offshore, was beginning to spit heavy, granular snow. The officer drove the vehicle up the embankment, aiming the spotlight at the massive stack of refrigerated shipping containers, a silent metallic labyrinth waiting in the dark. The beam cut a harsh, yellow swathe through the nascent blizzard, illuminating the steel boxes. For one brief, heart-stopping fraction of a second, the light reflected back. Not once, but several times. Yellowish eyes, arranged too close to the ground for a deer, too far apart for a coyote, gleamed sharply in the swirling white curtain. They were momentarily caught, transfixed by the harsh beam, before they instantly vanished, extinguished as the creatures moved into the surrounding shadow or dropped beneath the cover of the snow. The sudden vanishing act sent a profound shiver through Travis. These were not beasts that simply retreated. They moved into the shadow with calculated precision, understanding the vulnerability that comes with being caught in the light. They were too fast, too smart, too coordinated. The snow began to fall heavier, a thick, swirling shroud descending across the port. The town, locked down by the stalled storm, was now sharing its enclosed space with something that hunted not just with instinct, but with terrible, focused intelligence, using the cover of the coming disaster as its battle plan. The dread felt less like fear now and more like a cold, scientific certainty. They were being observed, categorized, and hunted by a strategic mind clothed in brutal, unimaginable strength. The stalled storm, still refusing to descend fully but locking the air traffic down absolutely, offered a temporary, terrifying reprieve, a chance to prepare before the true white hell broke loose. Municipal efforts turned frantic. Tessa Morgan, the utility operator, moved with grim efficiency. Recognizing that generalized illumination was a drain and a liability, she began the careful process of isolating power grids. The town started to pulse, not with steady light, but with islands of focused warmth and brightness, concentrated around key locations: the school, the hospital annex, the fuel depot. This act, rational and necessary, also served to highlight the targets, drawing a beacon around the vulnerable few. Meanwhile, the main road leading into the core of the town was being choked off. Heavy equipment scraped snow and dirt to create an improvised earthwork, upon which crews began constructing a barricade. They used whatever was available: tightly packed wooden pallets lashed together, heavy industrial cargo netting stretched taut, and finally, huge barrels filled with sand and rock ballast. It was a crude, desperate gesture, but it bought time and distance. Inside the school gymnasium, John Price, the director, oversaw the transformation of the athletic center into a functional, if temporary, refugee center. Cots were erected, and a perimeter was established using thick gymnasium mats and heavy wool blankets to shield the residents from the immense frosted windows. It was a desperate attempt to create a secure bubble, concentrating all human resources in one defensible area. As they worked, the wind, which had been erratic, shifted decisively. It was not the freezing cold that brought the news of the approaching threat, but the smell. Heavy, suffocating, and utterly foul, it rolled into the town from the direction of the coast, a noxious miasma of stale fish, rotting marine algae, and putrid chemicals. It was the scent of decay on a massive industrial scale. A sharp gust of wind tore a large section of corrugated metal roofing right off the old, defunct canning hangar down by the docks. The sudden noise of the ripping metal was swallowed instantly by the vast quiet, but the damage was done, exposing the massive, cavernous storage area below, a grim, dark invitation. Nina Parker, accompanied by Travis, rushed to the hangar to assess the vulnerability. The smell here was overwhelming, so intense it made the eyes water and the throat constrict. "They're using this place," Nina whispered, pulling her scarf higher over her mouth. "This is where they took the driver." Travis confirmed the suspicion by examining the outer wall of the hangar, specifically the thick-gauge steel sheeting. The metal was heavily scratched, but near the torn-off roofline, he found the deeper markings. Four-fingered grooves, distinct and profound, were driven into the steel. Not superficial scratches, but deeply impressed furrows that deformed the heavy metal sheeting. A human being, even with a pry bar, could not inflict this damage. This was the result of a powerful animalistic grab coupled with extreme unnatural leverage. There was an excessive, brutal efficiency to the damage, a horrifying mix of feral strength and deliberate precision. "They are reaching for things they shouldn't be able to reach," Travis observed, running a gloved finger along the deepest indentation. "This is not just some random brute force. They know how to apply pressure, how to tear what they need." He moved around the perimeter of the huge exposed hangar, focusing on the footprints in the snow, what few the wind had not scoured away. He found them near a stack of frozen nets, half buried in the snow. A semicircle of those bare, powerfully detailed foot impressions. They were evenly spaced, rhythmically placed, creating a perimeter of control around the ingress point. It confirmed multiple entities moving in concert, maintaining a precise distance from one another. "Look at this spacing," Travis instructed Nina, pointing to the uniformity of the prints. "They are not shuffling. They are measuring their strides. This is a perimeter patrol, not chaotic feeding. They are guarding this resource, moving with purpose." The chilling realization solidified in his mind. This was not merely a pack of desperate, diseased animals driven by hunger. They were operating under a structure, executing a concerted will. Someone, or something, was issuing commands, coordinating their movements, and defining their strategy. The horror was institutionalized, organized. They were facing an enemy that understood geometry, proximity, and defense. The cold, mechanical structure of the abandoned hangar, combined with the rhythmic, calculated tracks, spoke volumes. The dry, metallic taste of rising tension settled on Travis's tongue. He knew the animal kingdom intimately, knew how instinct drove every muscle twitch and snap of the jaw. But this was instinct refined by terrible clarity, guided by a ghost of human logic. The dread was no longer about what they might do. It was about the chilling certainty of what they planned to do, organized and prepared. They had secured their pantry, and now they were ready to secure their warm den. The pulse of the town's isolated lights suddenly felt fragile, defiant sparks in an ocean of orchestrated darkness. Travis spent the next hour translating the field evidence into a strategic profile. The pattern was becoming agonizingly clear, a textbook example of sophisticated predation. Reconnaissance, the pacing around the school perimeter, the systematic elimination of light, the attack on the outer generator systems, and the calculated strike from the enveloping darkness, the elimination of the snowplow driver. The ultimate goal was self-evident. The pack needed two things to survive the coming extended storm: warmth and a massive continuous supply of calories. The logical targets, the thermal concentration points, were the hospital annex and, most critically, the school shelter. "They know the town map," Travis explained later, huddled in the makeshift command center with Nina and Hannah Clark, the town veterinarian. "They are going for the heat sinks. A random predator hits the easiest target first, but these things are bypassing the isolated houses and going straight for the core infrastructure. It implies an understanding of the geography and our habits. To find more clues, they raided the archives of the Territorial Wildlife Agency, desperate for any parallel." Hannah managed to pull up archived camera footage from old hunting trails leading into the mountains and coastal tundra. The images were abysmal, grainy, blurred, and flickering, but they offered glimpses. The silhouettes were undeniably unnatural. They moved on their lower extremities, a heavy rocking gait that looked agonizingly unnatural, yet powerful. Their shoulders were disproportionately long, almost dragging, confirming a frequent need to drop back into a quadrupedal stance for bursts of speed. A thick, dark mane or dense crest of fur ran along the spine and neck, providing insulating mass and protection. Crucially, the footage confirmed Travis's earlier observation. The creatures continuously shifted their posture, toggling between the brute stability of 4 legs and the strategic visibility of 2. They were adapting, hybridizing their movement based on terrain and need. It was Hannah who found the second, more chilling piece of evidence. Near the abandoned fishing shed where the storm-racked fishing boat lay frozen in the sludge, they found a scatter of old nets and discarded gear. Nestled among the frozen refuse was a fragment of a uniform. It was the cloth shoulder patch and heavy plastic badge of an area deputy sheriff. Wade Turner. Turner had disappeared the previous winter, presumed lost to a flash blizzard while on patrol duty. The badge was coated in a thin, crystalline layer of salt, and what smelled distinctly like rancid marine oil. It was not just discarded, it was protected, wrapped lightly in a scrap of canvas. Hannah, meticulous and unnervingly calm, brought her expertise to bear. She had been examining the samples of the black, oily fur collected from the school fence under her powerful laboratory microscope, usually reserved for diagnosing livestock disease. "It is not a known species, Travis, and it is certainly not a myth," she said, her voice dry, devoid of emotion. "On a cellular level, it is a hyper-aggressive form of mammalian zoonosis. The hair follicles are hypertrophied. The structure is deforming. The growth rate is insane. It is an infectious agent accelerating musculature and bone mass to critical limits. It is biology gone violently wrong." She felt the cold, sticky fear. Not the ancient, superstitious terror of a monster, but the specific, concrete dread of a contagion, a biological entity that broke the rules of nature. Travis looked at the badge, then at the microscopic image of the monstrous hair. If it's a disease, there is a vector and a hierarchy. "The hierarchy is about survival," Hannah agreed, cleaning a slide. "The most virulent, the strongest, leads the rest to the highest caloric concentration. They need protein and warmth to fuel this rapid, agonizing transformation." Travis's gaze fell back to the badge of Wade Turner, the lost deputy. If the leader, the alpha, retains even scraps of human memory, that changes everything. It is not just driving instinct anymore. It is malice with a memory. It knows the grid, the routes, the weak points. It knows us. The horror had ceased to be abstract. The systematic nature of the hunt, the understanding of infrastructure, the coordinated movement, it all pointed back to the remnant of the human mind now guiding the biological atrocity. Wade Turner was the pack leader. He knew how to break into the school. He knew the location of the fuel drums. He knew where people would congregate for survival. The terror was no longer a general environmental threat. It was personal, precise, and steered by an individual who understood their vulnerabilities perfectly. The bone-deep cold of the polar night suddenly felt like a cage being shut by a familiar yet terrifying hand. The knowledge that the pack leader retained a vestige of human intelligence, specifically the geographical knowledge of a former sheriff, spurred the defenders into a desperate flurry of fortification. There was no time for contemplation, only action. The school gymnasium, now sheltering roughly 70% of the town's remaining population, became a fortress of necessity. Inside, John Price and his team of volunteers worked tirelessly, constructing internal thermal corridors. These were narrow walkways walled off with stacked gymnastics mats and heavy woolen blankets, serving two purposes: conserving precious generator heat in the center of the gym and, more crucially, guiding the residents away from the massive, vulnerable window arrays. The external view was systematically eliminated. Carpenters working in shifts hammered plywood and sheets of salvaged marine-grade lumber over every pane of glass, leaving only narrow, defensible pockets, shooting embrasures for the few armed volunteers, and observation posts for the medical team. Hannah Clark, the veterinarian, arrived carrying a heavy, olive-drab canvas pack. It contained her most potent arsenal: thick-walled syringes normally used for sedating large, fractious cattle or tranquilizing an agitated grizzly. The liquid inside was a highly concentrated cocktail of powerful animal sedatives, enough to temporarily immobilize a 1,000-pound beast. If they breach the perimeter, this is the last line of defense, she explained to Travis, her voice low and strained. It will not destroy them, but it will buy us the seconds we need to pull back. Aim for the large muscle groups, the neck or the haunches. Deep penetration is essential. She placed the syringes inside a tightly sealed cooler, ready for rapid deployment. On the roof, a small crew wrestled with the last of the available industrial-grade floodlights. They were heavy, powerful lamps, designed to illuminate the docks and required serious anchorage. Logan Fry, the head of the volunteer fire brigade, supervised the effort, securing the lamps to the metal vents with thick steel cables, ratcheting them tight. The light was their only true weapon. Any lapse in illumination meant instant, invisible attack. The main ground entrance became the focal point of the defense. Steel oil drums, filled with sand and rock ballast, were stacked 3 high, forming a formidable barrier. Behind this, the volunteers constructed improvised shields. These were remarkably effective, woven from thick fishing nets, tough nylon mesh designed to hold massive hauls of sea life, and then laced with salvaged aluminum rods, providing a flexible but resistant barrier against a charging body. Logan Fry and his firefighters focused on their elemental weapon: water. They stretched heavy canvas fire hoses from the nearest functioning hydrant toward the school's various stairwells and access ramps. The aim was not to drown the attackers. In this cold, water was a way to convert the approach into a deadly obstacle course. they rigged the nozzles to be fixed, aiming the massive icy streams precisely where the ground crew calculated the pack would make their first charge. The immediate freezing temperature meant that within minutes of deployment, those approaches would be layered in a treacherous, slick sheet of glazed ice. Travis, meanwhile, organized the final, most brutal layer of defense around the perimeter of the snow-covered courtyard. His team scattered dozens of self-made metal traps fashioned from construction rebar. They took heavy half-inch steel rods and bent them into sharp spiked crowns, metallic caltrops designed to inflict maximum pain and immediate disability to bare, unprotected feet or pads. These crowns were buried just beneath the new powdering of snow, waiting. The goal was simple: wound them, slow them, make their charge agonizing. The dry, metallic tang of tension, the taste of iron and adrenaline, was overpowering. Travis felt it settle on his tongue like a fine dust. The meticulous work of defense was a strange comfort. It was the last bastion of human logic against primal infectious horror. Standing at one of the newly cut observation slits, peering out at the cold, silent world, Travis listened to the continuous low thrum of the generators. They were burning fuel faster than anyone liked, but that sound was the demarcation line, the sound of warmth, life, and resistance against the absolute, consuming cold. He watched the heavy spotlights snap into place on the roof, casting harsh, overlapping cones of light across the courtyard. The town was now a small, desperate island, and the dark silence beyond the perimeter felt like the sea, waiting to swallow them whole. He checked the loading mechanism on the heavy-caliber rifle held loosely in his gloved hands. Every detail was crucial. The barricades, the nets, the ice, the rebar. All spoke to the terrifying certainty that they were not waiting for the storm to pass. They were waiting for the siege to begin. The wind, which had been whipping the snow into a frenzy, suddenly dropped. It was a short, jarring lull, the eye of the preparatory weather cycle before the full killing blow of the storm arrived. In the absolute silence, every small sound became an explosion. The dry creak of the plywood sheets, the nervous shifting of feet inside the gymnasium, the thin, high whine of the generators struggling under load. This sudden, acute stillness was infinitely more unsettling than any gale. The pack probed the defenses immediately. The first signs came from the far corner of the courtyard, away from the direct glare of the floodlights. The snow did not fall naturally there. It was displaced, shifting in small, heavy ripples, as something substantial moved just beneath the crust, exploiting the insulating cover of the drifts. They were feeling the vibration of the ground, testing for weak points along the foundation. Then came the impact. A series of heavy, muffled thuds echoed from the roof, a profound, rhythmic drumming above the gymnasium. The creatures had bypassed the main ground assault, recognizing the barrier, and were moving across the roof line, navigating the ventilation shafts and the narrow, darkened channels between the cones of the powerful floodlights. It was a calculated rush for the shadow, a desperate bid to reach the utility access points and plunge the entire compound into immediate darkness. The battle was fundamentally a struggle for illumination. Water hit the roof access. Logan Fry roared into the radio from his position near the main water line. The fire hoses, strategically aimed, burst to life. Powerful, high-pressure streams of near-freezing water erupted onto the flat roof and cascaded down the metal stairwells. The effect was immediate and horrifyingly efficient. The ramps and landing zones instantly slicked over, converting to sheets of treacherous, opaque ice. A guttural, high-pitched shriek, a sound that was half growl, half human scream of pain, cut through the noise of the rushing water. Bodies lost purchase, sliding heavily across the newly polished surface. Down below, Travis watched as one dark, substantial shape tumbled from the second-story service balcony, landing with a sickening thud on the icy approach ramp. The stream of water momentarily caught the creature, forcing it to slide, leaving bright crimson arcs, jagged torn lines, on the surface of the shining ice. The water had become their perfect weapon, a fluid shield of sheer slipperiness. As the creatures regained their footing, they became momentarily reckless, driven by the burning need for warmth and the pain of the cold water. One of them charged the main barricade, attempting to leap the stack of oil drums. Travis snapped his rifle up, tracking the massive, bounding shape. In that fleeting moment of illumination, as the creature strained against gravity, Travis saw the specific, sickening detail. In the dense, dark fur matted to the side of its head, there was a pale, almost invisible remnant, the shriveled, bloodless portion of a human ear, and hanging from the cartilage, the faint metallic gleam of a shattered silver earring. It was a jarring, recognizable detail of the former human identity now encased in the monstrosity. A volunteer marksman, posted on the observation slit 10 feet to Travis's left, fired. The heavy-caliber round struck the creature mid-leap, hitting the flank. The impact was enormous, halting the charge immediately. The beast dropped, thrashing, digging desperate claw marks into the packed snow. For a terrifying fractional pause, the creature's injured posture was undeniable. The bone structure exposed by the twisted fall was clearly, horribly human. A distinctly recognizable kneecap and femur jutting against the unnatural bulk of the surrounding muscle. Then, as the creature gathered itself for a desperate retreat, the structure fluidly blurred. The human joint vanished, replaced by the heavy, segmented, stabilizing configuration of a massive, powerful paw. The visual change, the sheer biological impossibility of the transformation happening in real time on the move, ripped through Travis's professional detachment like shrapnel. They did not just look like men sometimes. They were capable of changing the architecture of their bodies mid-stride, adapting from human agility to bestial stability and back again. The rational armor Travis had built around himself crumbled. This was beyond pathology. It was an absolute living nightmare, capable of defying the very physics of its own body. The attack subsided as quickly as it had begun, the creatures retreating back into the overwhelming safety of the sudden heavy snowfall, carrying their injured, leaving the perimeter gleaming with treacherous ice and streaked with dark, oxidizing blood. The immediate assault had been repelled, but the victory was temporary and costly. The pack had learned the defense structure. They knew the water was a threat and that the shadows were their only friend. Waiting for them to try again, relying solely on the school's limited fuel supply, was a guarantee of defeat. The siege would destroy them through resource exhaustion long before the storm passed. Travis initiated a high-risk plan, a reconnaissance mission to the port, aimed at confirming the pack leader's identity and disrupting their strategic supply cache. He took 2 of the most level-headed volunteers, Wyatt Sloan and Quinn Barrett, tough men accustomed to the long haul of the Northern Territory. They traveled in a heavy insulated snowcat, moving low and fast, hugging the fringes of the electrical light islands. The snow was now falling in heavy, wet clumps, insulating the sound and making the visibility unpredictable. Halfway to the docks, near the area where the old fish processors used to dry their seasonal catch, they found undeniable proof of the pack's intelligence. Lying on the open ground was a large pile of frozen, stacked fish, cod, halibut, and thick, fatty salmon, covered neatly by a thin, protective crust of ice. It was not scattered debris or waste. It was meticulously collected, a deliberate hoard of provisions, confirming a plan for sustained long-term survival through the duration of the polar night. This was a pantry, managed and controlled. The abandoned canning hangar, vast and rust-colored, was their ultimate target. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of salt, oxidizing iron, and that strange, pervasive odor of decay. They moved slowly, their flashlights cutting through the humid, dark interior. Travis spotted it first, dangling from a thick, transverse steel beam supporting the massive roof. It was a remnant of a heavy leather belt, broken clean through the buckle hole. On the reverse side of the worn, cracked leather, clearly visible beneath a coating of grime, were stamped initials, roughly etched. W.T. Wade Turner, the lost sheriff. The blood went cold in Travis's veins, a quick, chilling spike of certainty. Behind a high stack of defunct wooden crates, where the air was stagnant and profoundly cold, Wyatt's flashlight beam caught something else, startlingly out of place. Scrawled directly onto the cold steel wall with a thick piece of chalk or dried gypsum was a message. The handwriting was shaky, fragmented, the letters unevenly spaced, but the words were crystal clear, a desperate final warning. They are coming for the warmth. This was not animal marking. This was human communication, a struggle of a dying mind to warn the living. The pack leader, in some lucid, terrifying interval between episodes of biological horror, had left a record of its intent. They continued their search, moving toward the rotten, ice-encrusted supports beneath the main loading pier, a place of profound shadow and damp cold. Under the grating, amidst a foul bedding made of torn fishing nets and sodden, filth-covered canvas jackets, Travis's light snagged on something small and metallic. He reached down and retrieved it. A heavy, tarnished brass police medallion, the official issue for the county jurisdiction. Wade Turner's badge, matching the shoulder patch found earlier. This was the terrifying refinement of their intelligence. The pack was not just using human structures. They were collecting and safeguarding the relics of their former lives. They were not merely discarding their humanity. They were incorporating it into their new, horrific order, retaining symbols of leadership and identity. Travis held the icy brass in his hand, feeling the chilling confirmation. The hunter was a former lawman, a man who knew order, patrol routes, and defense strategy. The horror was now intimate, clothed in the memory of the town itself. The knowledge transformed the threat from a biological anomaly to a coordinated military assault, led by a terrifyingly specific spirit. They had confirmed the existence of their adversary's brain. Now they just needed to sever it. The only way to stop the pack was to destroy the creature that held the last shreds of Wade Turner's mind. Back in the relative security of the school, Hannah Clark became the vital interpreter of the nightmare. With the physical proof of Wade Turner's command, the WT belt, and the feverish chalk warning, the focus shifted from defense against generic beasts to strategic counterattack against a tactical enemy. Hannah stripped away the last layers of myth and superstition, replacing them with a more immediate, chilling biological reality. "Forget ancient curses or demonic possession," Hannah stated, tapping a pointer against a screen showing a magnified image of muscle tissue taken from a piece of recovered flesh. "This is a pathogen, a rare, hyper-aggressive zoonotic infection transmitted through blood and bites. It fundamentally changes the endocrine system. We are seeing massive hormonal spikes that trigger immediate catastrophic growth, what looks like phase shifts in cellular structure." She explained that the creature's unnatural size, the thick, shock-absorbent pads, and the ability to shift their gait were all symptoms of this hypergrowth. The infection forced the body to tear through existing structures, ligaments snapping, bones thickening rapidly, muscles hypertrophy beyond sustainable levels. This explained their immense, overwhelming strength. "The madness is not random bloodlust," she continued, her voice clinical and precise, despite the subject. "It is the constant, agonizing pain caused by this rapid internal restructuring, combined with massive inflammation and perpetual fever. They seek warmth and raw, high-calorie sustenance. They are fighting a biological war inside their own bodies, and the only way to win is to consume and find heat." Crucially, she confirmed the hierarchy. In any biologically driven emergency like this, the most successful transmitter, the one who adapts fastest and maintains function, becomes the alpha. The one with the highest cognitive function remaining is the strategist. That is Wade Turner. He is the command center. He guides the pack to the most efficient sources of survival. This rational framework, though horrific, offered a path forward. They could be harmed. They could be outmaneuvered. They could be stopped. The key was exploiting their biological needs, warmth and food, and targeting the leader's rational reliance on the town's established infrastructure. If Turner is leading, he will revert to what is familiar, Travis concluded, tracing a line on the topographical map. He was a patrolman. He knows the geography of maximum vulnerability, but he also knows the geography of control. Where would a sheriff go to establish control over the coast? The answer was immediate. The spit, the long, narrow finger of land capped by the old, defunct lighthouse. It offered elevation, a view of the bay, and the quickest route to the deep-sea fishing stores. But the spit had a vulnerability, a dangerous, shifting patch of thin ice covering a massive tidal crack where the current ran fast beneath the surface. "We draw them out," Travis declared, the plan forming rapidly. "We cannot fight them door to door. We use their strategic intelligence against them. We bait the spit with enough calories to make it an irresistible target. And when they commit, we use the light to disorient them and the unstable ice to contain them." The goal was simple and brutally necessary. Lure the pack onto the treacherous, fracturing ice, surround them with focused light to negate their advantage of shadow hunting, and then, if necessary, destroy the creature that hunted them and end the terrifying cycle of contagion before the storm sealed their fate completely. The plan was high risk, reliant on near-perfect timing and the unwavering focus of the remaining defenders. But inaction meant assimilation, and that was a terror far colder than the Arctic night. The temporary pause in the wind held, a precious, fragile gift from the brutal climate. The storm still loomed, a vast gray anvil hanging over the horizon. but the immediate visibility had improved to a desperate 50 yards. It was their window of opportunity, and they used every minute of it. Travis's team began the grueling work of laying the trap. The target was the spit, a 1.5 miles of exposed, frozen shoreline culminating in the low, square lighthouse structure. The ground was treacherous, a mix of rock, packed snow, and unreliable tidal ice. They hauled massive, oil-soaked cables from the port, heavy industrial lines designed for deep freeze conditions. These were stretched taut toward the lighthouse, powering a system of 3 huge directional floodlights, the same kind used to illuminate oil rigs mounted on heavy stabilizing tripods. The light operators, 2 seasoned mechanics, were instructed to focus the beams outward, creating a brilliant, circular wall of illumination that would leave the pack nowhere to hide, negating their innate advantage in the absolute darkness. The bait was crucial. From the partially submerged ruins of the old dock, they managed to salvage several containers filled with rock-hard dried fish and, more importantly, drums of high-grade marine animal fat. This mixture was powerful, rank, and irresistible. The stench of thick, frozen fish oil was smeared liberally around the lighthouse base and laid out in chunks along the spit, a potent, invisible thread of concentrated calories designed to lead the starving, pain-racked pack straight into the trap. The heavy, fishy aroma wafted across the frozen coast, cutting through the general scent of brine and diesel. Nina Parker, the medic, established the mobile aid station. She set up shop in the insulated cab of a tracked utility vehicle, turning the cramped space into a small, functional triage unit. Beside her was a case containing sutures, surgical staples, thick rolls of field dressing, tourniquets, and, most crucially, massive doses of powerful systemic analgesics. Her hands, though trembling slightly under the immense pressure, moved with practiced, precise coordination as she prepared the necessary tools for catastrophic injury. Travis distributed the rest of the crew, assigning rigid positions. The few capable marksmen were stationed high on a shallow earthen embankment, the only solid ground nearby, providing cover fire. The light operators were placed lower, focused solely on maintaining the brilliant perimeter. 2 men were tasked with continuous cable maintenance, constantly chipping away the dangerous, rapidly forming ice from the thick, exposed lines. A loss of light, Travis emphasized, meant an immediate and fatal exposure. The most dangerous element of the trap lay at a specific subtle bend in the coastline where the strong tidal currents created a deep, permanent fissure beneath the shelf ice. Here they laid a temporary bridge constructed from salvaged heavy wooden decking. It was sturdy enough to support a quick, deliberate crossing by a person, but it was designed to be unstable, ready to splinter and give way under the enormous shifting weight of a charging, panicked creature. This point, the calculated point of collapse, was their 0 hour. Travis stood at the edge of the embankment, watching the heavy tripods settle into the frozen ground. The atmosphere was almost unbearable. The stench of the bait, the hum of the portable power units, the brittle, sharp cold of the air. Everything was in place. They had surrendered the comfort of defense for the terrible necessity of the counterattack, luring the creatures out of the safety of their organized shadow and onto the unreliable, treacherous ground. The silence, punctuated only by the low crackle of the radio, felt immense, heavy with the certainty of imminent, savage conflict. The attack began not with a rush, but with an unnerving, strategic subtlety. Travis had anticipated a straight charge from the town's perimeter toward the rich smell of the bait. But the pack had learned its lesson. Instead of moving across the open, visible snow, they followed the very edge of the coastline, moving first through the thick, sheltering kelp and frozen marine debris, and then suddenly appearing from two directions simultaneously, flanking the spit, not attacking it head-on. Their learning curve was terrifyingly fast. Perimeter breach. 2 points. The light operator nearest the lighthouse screamed over the radio, his voice strained and high. The battle for light began instantly. The first disaster struck immediately. One of the massive floodlights positioned on the far right flank went dark with a brutal, sickening sound, a metallic scream, followed by the wet snap of a heavy cable being severed. The light source vanished, devoured by the absolute darkness. In that sudden, yawning void of shadow, sound was instantly swallowed. Wyatt, the volunteer guarding the power line in that section, began shouting, a strangled, panicked cry. Then silence. A moment later, there was only the faint, sickening sound of sliding and scraping metal. Quinn Barrett, the other volunteer on that line, never answered the subsequent radio call. He did not survive the darkness. The loss of the light and the loss of a man galvanized the remaining defenders. The two operational floodlights pulsed, desperately trying to overlap their beams to cover the new area of vulnerability. It was into this newly defined line of fire that the figure emerged. It walked with the heavy, powerful stride Travis had analyzed in the snow tracks. A bipedal gait, but one that shifted and rolled with immense, unnatural muscle mass. It wore the remnants of a heavy, dark blue coat, ragged and torn, identifiable even in the flickering light as a standard territorial patrol jacket. The collar was shredded, the lining hanging loose, but the body was a ruin of human form. The hands, usually hidden by heavy gloves, were visible. Fingers grotesquely elongated. The knuckles swollen into almost spherical joints, ending in thick, yellowed claws. The creature moved with the assured posture of a commander, indifferent to the brilliant glare of the focused light. As it stepped into the center of the illuminated zone, Travis felt the immediate devastating shock of recognition. The face was gaunt, the skin pale and stretched tight over the skull, but the eyes, now large, yellowed, and fixed in a predatory stare, belonged to Wade Turner. He was wearing the leather belt, the one with the etched WT, now cinched tight over a barrel chest that strained the remaining fabric of the coat. And instead of a duty holster, Travis saw a terrifying improvisation. A massive fishing knife, the blade taped rigidly to the creature's forearm, ready to strike and tear. He was a king of ice and hunger. The pack, numbering perhaps a dozen heavy shadows, clustered behind him, wary of the light but obedient to his presence. The creature, Wade Turner, raised its enormous clawed hand, not in attack, but in a gesture of command. Then, a sound emerged from the torn wreckage of his throat. It was rough, broken, overlaid with a bestial hiss, but it contained the shape of a word. Back, the voice grated, a horrifying, strained sound. Back, mine. The sound was not an animal call. It was a human command, warped by biological trauma. Two of the younger, more agitated creatures in the pack instantly recoiled, moving with the rapid, nervous retreat of dogs being harshly disciplined. The human memory was not just present. It was dominant. The mind of Wade Turner had not been eradicated by the infection. It had been weaponized, harnessing the brutal strength of the disease to maintain order and strategy. The horror was now undeniable. They faced a thinking, disciplined opponent who had been the town's protector. The raw, fractured command that came from Wade Turner's throat severed the last thread of rational warfare. Travis knew then that no bullet, no trap, no amount of sedatives could simply neutralize this enemy. It was a sentient disaster, anchored by a human mind. He lowered his rifle, carefully placing it onto the packed snow, and began removing his heavy gloves, exposing his bare hands to the cutting, dry cold. The cold stung instantly, a sharp, cleansing pain. He took a single, deliberate step onto the improvised wooden bridge over the tidal fissure. It creaked in protest beneath his boots. "Wade," Travis called out, his voice steady, carrying across the crisp, cold air. "Sheriff Turner. Let's talk." He stood exposed, vulnerable, attempting to appeal to the shreds of professional duty and humanity that remained in the monster standing 20 yards away. Wade Turner watched him, his yellowed eyes unblinking, the massive head cocked slightly. The rest of the pack remained motionless, held back by the spirit of their leader's authority. "They are cold," Turner's voice scraped out, a horrific, wet sound. "Always cold. Want the warm." "We can stop this, Wade," Travis urged, his hands raised in a universal gesture of non-aggression. "The storm is coming. We will evacuate the town. We will leave you the supplies. The containers at the port, the frozen stores, we leave it all. Your pack will have the food and the shelter. But we need to go." He was offering a desperate, impossible truce. The surrender of the entire town's infrastructure in exchange for their lives. Turner swayed slightly, the massive musculature rippling under the thin coat. For a fleeting instant, human grief or confusion flickered across his face, a shadow passing over the monstrous mask. He looked down at his own enormous clawed hands, then back at Travis. "You do not understand the order," Turner rasped. He pointed a massive finger, tipped with a black curved nail, toward the huddled masses visible in the light pouring from the school far behind Travis. "They are weak. They are food now. You are food." He shook his head slowly, deliberately. "The patrol must continue. The food must be organized. The winter is coming. You are the warmth, then you are the sustenance. You are the order." The use of the word order, the lawman's final terrible justification, was the breaking point. The negotiation was over. Turner had not just become a beast. He had formulated a new, terrifying system of survival based on the immediate consumption of his former community. As the word died on the cold air, a palpable shift occurred in the pack behind him. They began to stir, a low, guttural anticipation rising from the dark mass. Travis could see movement at the periphery, more shadows joining the group, confirming that the bitten and infected had survived and crossed over, swelling the ranks. This was not a contained threat. It was a viral, exponential horror that would devour every living soul in the region before spring. The ice beneath Travis's feet began to react. The sudden, accumulated vibration of the massive bodies and the subtle shift in Turner's weight caused the fragile surface to tremble. A low, resonant sound, a deep, booming vibration, rose from the fjord, singing through the planking of the temporary bridge. Cracks, thin and precise like etched lines on glass, shot out from the edges of the wooden decking, spider webbing across the tidal crack and extending directly toward the earthen embankment where the remaining defenders were clustered. Travis knew, with absolute terrifying certainty, that he was standing on the edge of the collapse. Wade Turner, the sheriff, was ready to break the ice and consume the patrol. This was not the end of the conflict, merely the final, bone-chilling confirmation of the winter war that had just begun. He took a single, controlled step back, leaving the empty, treacherous center of the bridge to the monster and the coming, consuming cold.